So it's noon.
Oh, thank you very much. So welcome, colleagues. Welcome to this session. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for connecting. My name is Mariela, and I work with the Independent Evaluation Group with IEG. As you may know, IEG is currently celebrating 50 years of independent evaluation at the World Bank, and on that occasion, we put together this series of lightning talks to share how evidence from evaluations informs World Bank efforts to advance development priorities. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this lightning talk about future-proofing national evaluation systems, about the gender promise. We will first listen to a short conversation between our IEG experts and then open the floor for questions and answers. You can drop them in the chat in the meantime. Let me now introduce our speakers. Elena Bardasi is a senior economist in IEG, where she focuses on assessing the gender impacts of policies and programs for poverty reduction. And Dugan Fraser is the program manager at the Global Evaluation Initiative, also known as GEI. So Elena, Dugan, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much for being on the call, everybody who's listening in. As Mariela said, my name is Dugan Fraser. I'm the program manager of the Global Evaluation Initiative. And I'm delighted to have this conversation with Elena. Correct. And before we go any further, I just want to introduce I just want to explain the title of the session a little bit. As I think most of you know, the Global Evaluation Initiative is concerned with strengthening country-level monitoring and evaluation systems. And we think of this as future-proofing these systems. And we want to be very mindful of what the demands of these systems are going to be in the future and how they need to deliver information that is useful, reliable, and accurate. And we want to make the argument that focusing on gender is one of the best ways of doing this. And so we're going to have this discussion and hopefully we'll convince you. And so to get into it, Elena, you've done a lot of evaluations at the IEG or participated in many. Why do you think it's important to focus on gender when we're talking about sustainable development? What does using a gender lens offer if you're trying to understand how well we're doing as we work towards achieving sustainable development?
Thank you, Dugan, and thank you for hosting this important conversation. Well, you know, we always say, you know, gender is a cross-cutting issue. We want to treat it as a cross-cutting issue, and indeed, it is a cross-cutting issue. But when you start thinking about gender, in my mind, you immediately realize and you are immediately forced to take the perspective of the beneficiaries, not of the intervention. And this is very important in every sector. It's important everywhere. It's inevitable. This means that we need really to push ourselves of asking the question of whose needs are we fulfilling. And we need to recognize that the systemic differences based on gender, which arise from imbalances of power, arises from imbalances in power and asymmetries and roles and cultural norms. And we need to consider all this. So immediately is a very challenging enterprise. We also need to consider other inequalities that intersect with gender, what we call intersectionality. And appreciating this perspective immediately tells us why this is a central question. Because if we don't understand all this, it's very, very hard to do even sectoral intervention that are really effective in fulfilling the roles of those. And sometimes these interventions cause also unintended impacts. Like it was the case of, for example, the Uganda Transport Project, the famous one that forces the institution of putting in place a policy on the social exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment, which is now part of our safeguards.
Right.
So that's definitely something that if one can anticipate that this type of perspectives can actually be much more effective in obtaining results at on the ground. But I'm also interested in your opinion. You know, why do you think it's important coming from where you come from?
I think that when you work in monitoring and evaluation, there's a real temptation to start to operate in an abstracted realm, a theoretical zone, where you talk about things detached from their real life experience. And when you talk about gender, as you say, I think you're forced to reposition yourself in the system, and you're forced to really grapple with what's really going on. And when you integrate gender into a national monitoring and evaluation system, I think it forces the practitioners and the stakeholders and the participants to start understanding what real life is like, and what does it mean to be talking about things, as you say, through the eye of the program participant, the people who are actually involved in the program. And for me and the people who work on the Global Evaluation Initiative, taking a gender lens is a way of ensuring that monitoring and evaluation systems are real, that they talk to genuine concerns and don't allow themselves to just drift off into that results-based management discourse of indicators and outcomes and talking about causal pathways. And I think that it's also a way of bringing a dynamism and an energy into these conversations, which otherwise can seem really dull. But when you involve struggle and people's efforts to improve their lives, and women have done that so incredibly successfully, understanding that it's back and forth, but we get a real energy. You know, we get so much from involving gender in the way we understand our work. When you, I'm bouncing back to you now, shamelessly, when you think about the evaluations that you see being done at the IEG, and you've done many, you've been involved in many, either as an evaluator yourself or as somebody who's been involved in this work, what have you concluded about what the bank is doing well in its gender programming, and where do you think it needs to improve?
Yeah, I mean, I must say I've been doing gender at the bank for a long time. I might try 15 years, perhaps, maybe even more.
Comes and goes.
Yes. So I've seen a tremendous amount of work done at the bank, an increase in attention over time. So definitely this is very reassuring. It happens much more frequently. Nobody has to explain why it is important. I think that this is this has been
this is important.
By industry.
That's a major gain.
Necessary first step.
Right.
The awareness, therefore, has very much increased, and this is a point that also the midterm review of the gender strategy that IEG did in 2021 stressed.
Right.
You know, there has been clearly an increase in the uptake of this as a staff.
It's definitely a strategic concern.
Yes, absolutely. And also the instrument, the training, the skills are much more diffused within the institution. Okay. We also have this conversation with staff, and we notice that in the various global practices, there are really people that are not only committed, but they also know and put a lot of efforts in their own specialty in advancing the discussion on gender. The project designs also have improved, and this is something that we have noticed in the recent gender in FCD evaluation that we've done. We saw that there are more and more transformational elements that get integrated into the design, meaning attempts of really looking deeper at some of the root causes of gender inequality that needs to be explicitly addressed. So there are this effort to work with men, to work with boys, to work with the religious leaders, and we see this happening more and more, which is quite new. I mean, it didn't happen earlier. The areas that I would say remain problematic is, of course, what happens at implementation. This sometimes breaks down. We don't have a good system in really knowing what happens in implementation in a very systematic way. The results, of course, are also problematic. We observe, you were talking about indicators. Yes, it's not only about indicators, but it's also about indicators for monitoring and for evaluation. And we always struggle in, discerning what is the evidence that is there in order to suggest what the results are. This is a big question. What are we achieving? And this is something that we are actually trying to do in this evaluation that it's ongoing on evaluating how the bank is doing in delivering on this. So a lot of this, shadow, but light as well. We want to highlight also the positive, of course. But one thing that is interesting, you were talking about the country system before, and we use data from very different sources. In some cases, project data, or it could be more administrative data sometimes. So I was wondering, if you look at systematically at the country system levels, do you see some gaps, or what are the type of gaps that you think or your client pointed to when in this framework of the country system?
I think with so many of these special areas, these strategic, cross-cutting, but highly important topics, as you say, over the last 10 or so years, there has become a focus on gathering data. And there's been a greater awareness of the importance of having these conversations. But I think the general critique, which came up in our conversation yesterday about environmental and sustainability questions, is there's not enough use made of this data. And I think that while data availability and data quality could all be improved, more important, I think, is the fact that we need a strong, clear policy agenda that makes it explicit how gender equality is going to be achieved and what role evaluative evidence plays in making those policies more implementable. And these, of course, are essentially political questions. Yes. And these are essentially questions around, are political parties and people who play a role in governance authentically committed to change? And so this question of transformation is really a key one, because it comes up in the climate conversation, it comes up in gender, and it means that we have to start really getting our heads around change on a really fundamental basis. And I don't know if we're really ready. I know for myself, I'm daunted by change. It's very scary, it's very tiring, and it's something I think we have to really wrap our heads around. But I want to go a bit deeper in one of the things you asked about, which relates to the bank's gender strategy. And when we talk about it outside of the World Bank Group, one of the big critiques that gets leveled is that the bank doesn't name patriarchy. It doesn't name a number of the things that are underlying the situation that needs to be addressed, and that the bank doesn't speak of feminism. Do you think that naming patriarchy and putting feminism more clearly in the bank's strategic frame would be valuable?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very big question, and I believe that, I mean, you're correct. You don't find much discussion about these topics. You know, patriarchy, feminism, this language is a little bit absent from, is absent from.
We're back.
Yes, we are back. At the same time, though, I kind of realized that the bank has made de facto steps in some interesting directions. For example, we talk about GBV in the bank. This was not the case, let's say 8 years ago, perhaps 10 years ago. We have introduced, and is going to be reflected in the new strategy, the sexual orientation and gender identity agenda that is going to be integrated into the new strategy. This is also relatively recent. And I remember the discussion during the WDR 2012, so we are 10 years ago, there was at some point a question, should we talk about the gender identity? And it was no. It was really very, very difficult and making people uncomfortable at that time. So I recognize that the bank de facto is trying to do steps in this direction. Does it name it feminism? Does it name it patriarchy? Does it have an explicit framework? No, for sure.
Right.
But perhaps our clients are also the ones that are very eager to hear more why is it good for them, for their economy, for their society. So maybe there is also playing with this other angle a little bit more safe.
Interesting.
But I know that you have in GEI Canada as a donor that is actually pushing for a feminist angle approach to evaluation country system. So what do you think about it? How do you deal with it?
Yeah, so the Global Affairs Canada is an investor in the Global Evaluation Initiative, and through our relationship with them, we are prioritizing work we're calling feminist innovations in monitoring and evaluation. My understanding is that from the Canadian perspective, they think that one of the most effective ways of building a prosperous, safe, inclusive world is to focus on empowering girls and women and to be essentially working for gender equality. And I think there's a beautiful logic that we can really get behind around that. And some of the things we're doing as part of this project is to very explicitly focus on exactly what's happening. We are kicking off with some research into what current practices are around gender and how it gets treated in national monitoring and evaluation systems and efforts to strengthen them. So we'll be doing an exercise talking to our partners about what are you doing about gender, how are you integrating it into your work? And then based on that understanding, we'll be in a better position to be suggesting ways to them of making gender a bigger component of their work. But it's definitely a journey, and it's definitely one we are looking for co-travelers on. And we are very pleased that we've got the relationship with the gender practitioners in the IEG. And we're looking forward to making this something other people can get behind and get on board with. When you think about what the GEI should be doing, and you think about how to be going about building the capacity in countries to do this work better, what do you think are priorities that we should be bearing in mind?
Yeah, very quickly. You touch upon something like that before. You said we needed to promote the use of data. I would argue that even in terms of availability of data, even sex disaggregated data, there is work to do.
Definitely.
Because these data are not always available. I was reading in a recent report that is very interesting, and I recommend by Data2X, which is a CSO working on the quality and availability to improve the quality and availability of gender disaggregated of gender data in general, that many SDGs don't have sex disaggregated data, even if gender is essentially integrated in all the SDGs. And in some cases, the indicators are totally absent. In one third of the cases, this is absent. So there is a lot of work to do at that
Right.
level. And then, of course, at the level of use, you are correct. And we saw in the recent pandemic how important it is to have this system updated and real time and ready to understand the situation in health, in education, in the labor market, in GBV, in care. So a lot of important areas that we need to keep monitoring. So I think there is really a lot of good work that you can be doing, but there is demand. Do you think that the countries have this demand and this awareness of the importance of this data?
I think they do. I think it's growing. I think, as you say, it's been. I think it's been a remarkable achievement over the last 15 years of the global evaluation and development community to really take up gender. I mean, I think sometimes it gets taken up as a topic that everybody can support, and that's not seen as too disruptive. But I think that sometimes one can take advantage of that energy and use it as a way of initiating things that are deeply transformative, but which people can support and which they're not scared of. We kind of at the end of the to and fro between us, and we were wondering if there were any questions in the group. For
Thank
example,
you, Dugan and Elena, for this fascinating conversation. Yes, we have a question from Patricia. She's asking if you could share an example when evidence has made a difference in country policies.
Oh my gosh, so that's a
that's the big evaluator question on every topic, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think that evidence is always something that is very persuasive in front of a policymaker. I think the bank has put a lot of efforts in that. You know, we have the gender labs, we have this impact evaluation, stream that tries to bring real-time evidence for policies. We have other forms of assessment and evaluation. So I think that in general, I would argue that all this type of evidence is important. It's important to make a difference. I mean, in some cases could be a report, in some cases could be setting the conversation, in some cases could be a platform. I'm a little bit hesitant to really draw a very
direct line.
Yeah, because sometimes they go back and forth.
Yes.
The political cycle is too fast sometimes with respect to these processes. And you have in some cases a lot of laws that get, for example, approved. Women, Business and the Law is a publication of the bank. And thanks to this, there are laws that are going to that are approved. I mean, I don't want to name countries, but I can think now of a situation where, for example, abortion laws are approved and introduced in countries. Is this going to be implemented? Is this going to stick for a long run? I mean, these are all the cases of, it's never ended, the process of really ensuring that the rights achieved are there to stay. I think it's...
You know, when I was a young evaluator and I had great hair and a beautiful waistline, I imagined that there was this straight line that went, build someone's capacity, they'll do a better evaluation and produce better evidence. That evidence will lead to some kind of a policy change. That policy change will then improve people's lives. And what I've come to really I've been forced to recognize is that it works like that, but it's very slow and it's very iterative.
Yes.
And it sometimes goes backwards. And so it's often not a case of a single piece of evidence that changes policy, that improves lives. But I think these are cumulative processes that happen over decades. And I think when it's something fundamental like gender, in which the reason patriarchy is so strong is because there are people who really benefit from it. And so when you're talking about gender work, you are really engaged in a tussle and pushing people and getting them to change what they consider to be normal, shifting norms is a slow process. And I mean, you mentioned abortion legislation, which we're seeing coming in really interesting places in ways that we hadn't before. So yeah, I think that we can maybe as part of this research also do a bit more in identifying examples of where evaluative evidence has contributed to policy changes in ways that can be clearly demonstrated. Back to you, Mariella.
Thank you. I'm seeing we have two questions from Arunjana and one from Serena. So I will ask the three of them, and maybe you can take them as you can. So the first question is, could you talk a bit more about the World Bank's approach to incorporating concepts around gender identity in its approach to gender? Can we expect to see that in the next gender strategy or World Development Report from the bank? That would be the first one. The second one is from the perspective of GEI's work on ECD with countries. Are there discussions around the specific country-based challenges that incorporating concepts around gender identity will face? One can imagine in countries with some degrees of cultural social conservatism, there will be general opposition to thinking about gender identities as opposed to adopting a binary view on gender. And the last one is, I have a question for Dugan. I understand there is work to do in the countries to improve the use of gender indicators, the production of gender statistics, and also the use of them. What about methods of data collection? What is GEI doing to build the capacity of country actors on gender-sensitive methods and data collection? So 3 questions and 4 minutes to wrap this up. Thank you.
Let me give you an opportunity to respond to the ones you feel you can.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can do justice to really reflect on the SOGI agenda. I think it's for what it, in relation to the gender strategy, this is pretty new. So this has been introduced just now in the new strategy. It was not part of it before. This is an agenda that has been spurred, well, it's part of the sustainable development global practice. This is where it sits. And I'm glad that actually it's going to be moved into the gender strategy because it's definitely a question of gender identity, and it was until now 2023 2024 it was not elevated at this level. In terms of the approach, I'm not sure I can. I mean, I saw a draft of this, the new gender strategy, but I think it's a little bit too premature to see how they really are going to take it on. So
also, I mean, we're limited in our ability to comment on the bank's gender strategy sitting where we do, which is this independent evaluative unit, right?
Yeah.
So
well, we hope to have something to say in a little while when we are advancing with the gender, the evaluation of the gender inequalities. Yes.
And so I know we're very short on time, but I have to answer Serena's question, which is, what about methods of data collection? What is GEI doing to build the capacity of country actors on gender-sensitive methods of data collection? Look, we're not doing enough. But that is what we need to be doing more of. And it's building exactly those systems. But, we don't want to go out there and say, build strong data collection systems that focus on gender. We want to strengthen the entire system. And that is really, really slow work. And ultimately, it's work about our relationships. It's about our ability to get commitment from people who understand the value that evaluation offers and who are willing to put the time and energy into building those systems. And what we need to be doing is making sure that every system is able to manage data relating to gender, relating to fragility, relating to climate in ways that are appropriate and give policymakers the information they need on which to act. This is a perennial problem when you're dealing with something like gender. Do you want to mainstream it and treat it as something that happens across the whole program? Or is it something you want to foreground and prioritize and treat it as a strategic entry point? And what we're trying to do is to do both. But that takes care and a lot of resources. And I think, as I said earlier to Elena, the priority is to make sure we understand what our partners are doing and not be assuming anything about the way that we work. I will say one thing though, and that is that the Canadian approach is very helpful. It's a very thoughtful approach. The Global Affairs Canada material on their feminist foreign assistance policy framework has been very useful in relation to a number of the core concepts that they incorporate in the approach, and we're going to be aiming to use those as much as possible. Underlying a lot of the way we are thinking about this is a perspective on the evaluation economy. We want to be making sure that we strengthen these systems so that they become places where people can earn a living. And when we talk about people earning a living from doing evaluations, we mean women. We mean young women who are coming out of graduate programs. We want to be able to provide them pathways into evaluation as a career. So these are some of the things that we're trying to work on. And I see we're out of time. So I'm going to hand back to you, Mariella.
No, thank you very much for sharing your insights, Dugan and Elena. That was great. And for responding to these questions in such a short time. So without further ado, let me wrap up this session. Thank you everyone for joining and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you to my guests.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Dugan. Thank you all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.